America gained its independence, it was under British rule. The British king began establishing colonies in America. These colonies are what we know to be the 13 original colonies, which are New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The colonists were growing weary with the government. They had no say in what was happening in their own colonies. The British were imposing taxes left and right. To pay off some enormous debt that was left from the French and Indian War, Parliament passed the Stamp Act in March of 1765 that would force taxes on newspapers, pamphlets, legal documents, and even playing cards. These items would bear a tax stamp, and then the tax would be collected in exchange for the stamp to show that it had been paid. They also imposed the Townshend Act in the summer of 1767. With this passed, they taxed goods that the Americans imported from Great Britain. Hatred stirred even deeper when British soldiers fired into a growing crowd of American colonists in March of 1770 due to the tension and taunting that had grown between the British and some Boston locals. This event, known as the Boston Massacre, killed 5 civilians and wounded 6. Things only continued to get worse. In December of 1773, Parliament enacted a new law that was called the Tea Act. This law placed a tax on tea that the Americans were importing from Dutch traders. In rebellion, the Sons of Liberty disguised themselves as Native Americans, jumped upon 3 ships in the Boston harbor, and destroyed over 92,000 pounds of the British tea by dumping it into the harbor. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. To push back against the rebellion, Parliament passed a series of laws known as the Coercive Acts, or the Intolerable Acts, which would close the Boston harbor until compensation was paid back to the government for the tea. It replaced the elected council in the colonies with one that was appointed by the British. It gave powers to the British military governor and refused town meetings that didn't obtain approval first. The Quartering Acts also added fuel to the fire by giving power to the British military to demand housing for their troops in vacant houses and buildings. This didn't force the colonists to board the troops, however, it did force them to have to pay for the expense of housing and feeding the troops. The British made plans to capture colonial leaders Sam Adams and John Hancock in Lexington and then head to Concord to retrieve their gunpowder. However, American spies heard about the plan and they prepared for the British soldiers. The British fleet was met by 77 American soldiers who began shooting. 7 Americans died along with 73 British men, while 174 British soldiers were wounded and 26 were missing in action. This proved to the British that the Americans were very serious in their stance and had to be taken seriously. This was the start of the American Revolutionary War. In 1774, a Continental Congress was created and elected to be the governing body of the colonies during the war. There was a call for independence to finally break free from British rule. Virginia delegated Richard Henry Lee to represent them in the Congress. Lee proposed a resolution to gain independence. He stated, "Resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved." Thomas Paine also had a hand in encouraging many colonists to lean towards independence from British government. On July 2nd, 1776, the Lee Resolution was accepted, and on July 4th, 1776, the revision of the Declaration of Independence drafted by Thomas Jefferson was approved. This was the moment that the colonies finally gained their independence. Due to the absence of some of the members of the Continental Congress, the document couldn't be signed until August 2nd, 1776, when 56 delegates signed the official document declaring independence from Britain. Britain finally recognized America's independence when the Americans won the Revolutionary War and the Treaty of Paris was signed.